For those of you confused, the reason I wear glasses is so that you can tell me and Father Dave apart. I realize it's not fair to you all, right? Two ridiculously good-looking bald guys named Dave. That's a challenging move for you all. It helps that I'm the one wearing pants, though, just so you know. In 1859, summer of 1859, tens of thousands of people gathered around the gorge at Niagara Falls to witness a feat so daring they couldn't even begin to imagine it. Charles Blondin, a French acrobat and tightrope walker, had announced that he would walk across the Niagara Gorge on a 2-inch wide rope, suspended 160 feet above the water. And then on June 30th, with no safety net, Blondin stepped onto an 1,100-foot long rope and slowly made his way across the gorge. Step by step, balancing with the bar, he crossed the roaring waters below. Cheers erupted as he reached the other side safely. But that was just the beginning. In the weeks that would follow, he would perform that feat many more times, adding a twist each time. One time he crossed blindfolded. Next, he crossed while walking on stilts. One time, he even crossed carrying a small stove in which he stopped halfway in the middle to make an omelet, eat breakfast, and then continued the rest of the way across the waters. Each new performance drew a larger crowd and a louder applause. Then one day, after pushing a wheelbarrow across the rope and back, he turned to the cheering crowd and he asked, "Do you believe I can carry a person across this rope?" The crowd roared, "Yes, absolutely, you're the greatest we've ever seen." To which he smiled and then asked, "Great, which one of you will be that person?" Suddenly, the crowd grew silent. Though everyone believed he could do it, no hands were raised. No one was willing to be the one to trust him with their life. Eventually, his manager, because the show must go on, climbed on his back, and Blondin walked with slow, precise steps across 1,100 feet of rope, 160 feet in the air, carrying his manager to the other side safely. I'm intrigued by this story because to me, I think it begins to dissect this idea of faith. Because you see, many people there believed that he could do it, but no one believed he could do it for him. Many believed he had the ability to do it, but no one believed that he could do it for them. And when I hear this story, I can't help but to think about how these people were invited to this moment that they all believed in. But the minute that moment clashed with their comfort, with their perceived risk, every hand went down. And when I think about this story and this kind of dissection of faith, I think a lot about that famous passage in the book of James. And I think in some ways this maybe starts to scratch at some aspect of that, where we hear faith without works is dead. Now, I know immediately we understand that to mean this need to have these works of charity to help those who are in need. And absolutely. But I think if we read deeper, James affords us a little bit wider, maybe possibly deeper layered understanding, one that doesn't conflict with the immediate understanding. In fact, one that probably supports it. And so in the book of James, we read this. Faith of itself, if it does not have works, is dead. And then James continues, you believe that God is one? You do well. Even the demons believe that and tremble. Do you want proof, you ignoramus, that faith without works is useless? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered his son Isaac upon the altar? Now, at first this reads kind of nice and placid, but James is bringing the heat. He says, oh, you believe in God? Great, so do the demons. Your faith life is on par with hell. Congrats, champ. Your standards suck. And then he goes on. He begins to break it open, but not before he pauses to call me an ignoramus. After the bit of name calling, he goes on and he offers proof. He offers the story of Abraham, the one who offered his son Isaac as a sacrifice. He offers this as proof that faith without works is dead. And you probably remember that story, the story of Abraham. Abraham was told he'd be a father of many nations, and that through his son Isaac, his many descendants would carry his name. And then God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. So they traveled for 3 days up a mountain to sacrifice his son. And for those 3 days, Isaac carried the wood for the sacrifice, unknowingly that he would be the sacrifice. And then he gets to the top of this mountain, and Abraham binds Isaac, places him on the altar, pulls out the knife, and just before he brings it down on his son, the angel of the Lord stops him and affirms his faithfulness. As a dad, I have to say, I can't imagine this moment. I can't imagine the severity, the heaviness of this moment. But can you imagine the drive home? At least 2 days of awkward silence. And then somewhere around early morning on day 3, Isaac begins to break the ice. What the hell, Dad? And Abraham's like, I know, but like, you don't understand, like you and your mom, and then God was like, and I was like, oh, yogurt land. You want yogurt land? Can I buy your love with yum yums? Let's go get yogurt. Like every dad would try to do in that scenario. Either way, James sees this moment and holds it up as proof that faith without works is dead. He holds up Abraham's faith as this example because Abraham's faith was not simply a proclamation. It was a proclamation that moved into action. Regardless of the risk that could be calculated, it was a proclamation of faith that moved into action. And I think as we begin to look at Abraham, we find that his action actually revealed what he believed. He believed that God said he would be a father of many nations, and that through his son Isaac, descendants would bear his name. And so he reasoned, if God said it, God will do it. And so therefore, I can act in hope because he is faithful. And I'm sure, as a normal human being, he thought through this and he reasoned to himself, it doesn't add up. The idea of sacrificing my son doesn't add up. But if he who is faithful said he would do it, said he would give me descendants through Isaac, then though this moment, the pain, the heartache, the difficulty of this moment, though it is a part of the story, it must not be the end of the story because he has promised me something. And though I don't know how I get from here to what he has promised, this cannot be the end of the story because he is faithful. Sure, I may not understand it. I don't know how we go from Isaac bringing me nations named after me and me sacrificing my son. I don't know how to cross that gap. But I know that my faith is in him, not in my understanding of what he is doing. And so James holds him up as this trophy, this example of this great faith. And theologians would say the thing that would allow that gap to be crossed in Abraham's heart is his hope in God's ability to resurrect the dead. Because he ran the math on that real quick. I'm going to sacrifice my son dead. And yet God promised that through my son, I will receive nations. So God must do something between this moment and that moment to bring his promise to fruition. My God must have power over the dead. And his faith in who God was is moved into this act of hope, risking everything he could calculate, everything in that moment, everything in his being, every fiber of his body, of his human intuition went against that moment. But he reconciled not with his understanding of what God was doing, but his faith in him, regardless of what he's doing. And he becomes the father of faith. Founded on the belief that God fulfills his promises, Abraham becomes the example of what a living faith looks like. Just as Pope Leo recently said, hope is born of faith. We might even push a little bit further and say that hope is the incarnation of our faith. Stop for a second, little I incarnation, okay? If you're tempted to call me a heretic and jump to some crazy thing and call Scott Hahn, just give me a minute to explain, okay? At the end of it, you can just chalk it up to a bad analogy. I promise I'm not trying to be heretical with this. Here's what I mean, that hope is a willed expression of faith, an action chosen because of faith. It's what gives faith a real tangible touch point in our lives. Hope is a work that gives flesh to what we claim to believe. A work that without it, our faith is empty theology, hollow notion that offers nothing nor demands nothing upon our lives, a faith that is dead. But we know how difficult it can be to act in hope. Even for those of us that do believe, that claim of faith, we know how difficult it is to actually step into the gap. And I believe that's because we know that in our fallen nature, hope cost us something. There's a risk involved. Think about it. Do you think Abraham, his faith in what God was asking him to do, and his obedience, his act of hope in following through with that command, do you think that didn't cost him anything? Even if it cost him his will, his comfort, his heartache. It cost him his son. At the very least, he had to pay for Isaac's therapy afterward. This cost Abraham something. My brothers and sisters, this is the point I want to make. It demanded him to move beyond himself, beyond his understanding, leaning on God and not what he could make of the situation. Not his best effort, his best solution, his best outcome, but solely on the good nature of this God that was asking him to step out in this act of hope. And maybe that's actually why I find that story of the tightrope walker challenging. Because in that story, many were filled with faith that he could do it. But when the invitation came to turn their faith into action, they calculated the risk. And when the risk outweighed the invitation, they stayed on the shore, hidden in the crowd, and they applauded from a distance. And you might say, well, David, at least they all went home safely, unscathed and unchanged. And I would say, yes, and that's exactly my point. This crowd came to the edge of these great falls. They saw great power on display. They were invited to experience this power in a very personal way. They were elbow to elbow with this great moment in history, and they all believed it could be done. And yet they went home exactly the same. Entertained by their belief, but not changed by their belief. And if you'd allow me to use this tightrope walker as an analogy for us, perhaps that's exactly how some of us treat our faith. We come to these moments and we profess to believe in something. And then there's an invitation, a gap, a need to step out in this act of hope, but we run the risk, we calculate the cost, and our hands go down and we step back. And instead we shrink into the crowd and we applaud from a distance. We come face to face with these great moments. See power on display, invited to encounter that power personally. We go elbow to elbow with these God moments that would shift history. And we profess to believe he can do it. And then we go home exactly the same. Entertained by our beliefs, but never changed by them. And this is because we have a suspicion of God. We have a suspicion of God that causes us to wrongfully weigh out the risks compared to his promise. We have a suspicion, is he really this good? Will he really come through? Can he do the things he says he does? Is he that good, that loving, that forgiving? Is he going to provide in the ways that he promised he would? Scripture is filled with promises, and we have the suspicion that it's empty promises. And so we calculate the risk from our fallen nature. If I trust him, it's gonna change something in my life. If I trust him, I can't live by my will. If I trust him, I'm gonna have to surrender to my opinions to his truth. If I trust him, something is gonna change. I'm gonna have to step into a gap and let go of my control, let go of my comfort. It may cause heartache, it may cause pain if I trust him. And so we run the calculator and we come up and look at the receipt and say, it's far too risky. Because we're suspicious that he just may not fulfill his promise. And so we live without hope. At least we live with a misplaced hope. As Father Dave and Dr. Mary talked about and so beautifully earlier in this conference, that we place our hope in other things. And we're all constantly trying to place our hope in something. And the reality is, friends, we place our hope in the thing that we believe most. Not the thing we proclaim to believe most, but the thing deep down we actually believe most. We said that Abraham was noted to be the father of the faith because his faith led to action. His action revealed what he believed about God and God's promises in his life. And so he stepped out in a place that seemed very unreasonable, in a place that was too costly, too risky, but he trusted God and not necessarily his understanding of the circumstance, so he stepped out. Every action we take is sourced in some sort of belief, even unknowingly. But if we're honest with God and we allow the Holy Spirit to begin to sift these beliefs of ours, we're going to find that often that belief shows to be faith more in ourselves than in him. More faith in our comfort than in his calling. More faith in our plan than in his divine timing. More faith in our understanding than in his mystery. More faith in our money than in his providence. More faith in our opinions than his truth. More faith in our sinfulness than his mercy. More faith in our failures than his perfection. More faith in our brokenness than the works of the cross. More faith in our death than in his resurrection. And we all try to place our hope on the thing we believe most. And when we believe most is our idea, our opinion, our timing, our understanding, then we act accordingly. And we place our hope in things that can never sustain us. We let our hope be held in things that affirm our control, affirm our ideas, our comfort, and our will. And as a result, we are left, if not worse, exactly the same. Wandering through life with the hopelessness to prove that our faith is dead. In his book, Searching for and Maintaining Peace, Father Jacques Philippe compares the providence of God to a parachute. And in short, he says something like this, that if you were to use a parachute, there's something very clear that has to happen. There has to be space between you and the parachute for it to work. And he says, God's providence is like that parachute. And the problem is we orchestrate our lives so we never have to have room between us and the parachute. So we never ever have to feel it pull us by its strength. We wear the parachute, we claim the parachute, but we refuse to give space for the parachute to open. And in this notion, he goes on to say this is where the problem lies. Many do not believe in providence because they have never experienced it, but they never experienced it because they've never jumped into the void and taken the leap of faith. They never give it the possibility to intervene. They calculate everything, anticipate everything. They seek to resolve everything by counting on themselves instead of counting on God. And if I'm honest with you, that is an accurate description of most of the times I'm invited to take a step of faith, an act of hope. I try to orchestrate my life so I can hold a profession of how great Jesus is, but then never let him have to demonstrate that greatness in my existence. I profess how much he'll provide, but then I stock and hoard to make sure he never has to. I never jump into the void to see if the parachute will open so I can feel it carrying my weight. But dang, I look good wearing it. And maybe that's true for you. Maybe you profess a belief in God, his omnipotence, his power, his presence, his generosity, his mercy, his grace, his nearness, and yet you've calculated the risks and you've orchestrated your life to where you never have to actually take an act of hope on his generosity, his nearness, his mercy, his omnipotence. But my friends, it doesn't have to be that way. A good friend of mine, Pope Benedict, in his encyclical Saved by Hope, while commenting on the relationship between faith and hope, and how faith is a realization of things hoped for, says this: faith is not merely a personal reaching out towards things to come that are still totally absent. It gives us something. It gives us even now something of the reality we are waiting for. Faith draws the future into the present so that it is no longer simply a not yet. The fact that this future exists changes the present. The present is touched by the future reality, and thus the things of the future spill over into those of the present. The fact that there's a future reality that exists changes this moment. He says that is the work of faith. And when we with faith step into hope, this present moment gets to encounter the future that awaits us. As he says, the future spills over into this moment. Friends, Christ is our future. The salvation, redemption, and wholeness that results in being in union with him is our future. We call that future heaven. Complete and total union, complete and total wholeness with him for all eternity. And Benedict says that faith allows us to acknowledge that future, and that future changes this moment, because through hope it will spill over into these present needs, these present challenges, these heartaches and hardships. The future God has for us through his incarnation, crucifixion, and resurrection has been given access to us now. And this is what the Gospels tell us. In Mark chapter 5, we read, there was a woman afflicted with a hemorrhage for 12 years. She had suffered greatly at the hands of many doctors and spent all that she had. Yet she was not helped and only grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. She said, if I but touch his clothes, I shall be cured. Immediately her flow of blood dried up. She felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Jesus, aware at once that the power had gone out from him, turned around in the crowd and asked, who has touched my clothes? But his disciples said to him, you see how the crowd is pressing upon you? And yet you ask, who touched me? And he looked around to see who had done it. The woman, realizing what would happen to her, approached in fear and trembling. She fell down before Jesus and told him the whole truth. He said to her, daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be cured of your affliction. We see this woman suffering for 12 years. And she tried everything she could think of to bring hope to her life. She tried everything the world would offer her to place her hope in. And everything she tried left her worse than before. And now in this moment, she's exhausted and she has no recourse. But she's heard the stories of Jesus. And now Jesus is passing by and she gets to encounter him. And I think it's fascinating in the story, this line in which after she touches him, Jesus says, "Who has touched my clothes?" And his disciples kind of mock him like, "Are you kidding me? The crowd is pressing in on you. Everyone's touching you, dude." And I think that's a profound point. That day, many people touched Jesus, but only one encountered his divine power. And I think possibly this is a truth that some of us in this room need to come face to face with. That being near Jesus does not mean we've encountered him. And this could be a lifelong delusion that many of us Catholics live in because we've confused proximity to Jesus as intimacy with Jesus. And those are two drastically different things. Many people in that crowd touched him. Many people in that crowd had proximity to Jesus, but only one person sought him with the intimacy of her wounds and then experienced his power. But she does. In her wounds, she reaches out and she touches him and she's healed. Standing on her faith, she makes this act of hope. But she did not reach out to him without risk. This woman and her condition would have caused her to be ritually impure, unclean according to the law. And she wouldn't have been allowed to be in contact with community. Anything she touched, anyone she touched would be deemed unclean. And she would be severely punished for this. She'd be exiled from the community. She lived for 12 years in deep loneliness and isolation. And now she's entering this crowd, and just being among that crowd could have caused greater punishment, let alone reaching out and touching a man with her lack of cleanliness. She risked it all because the only thing that was greater than her hesitation was her desperation that he might be the one they said he is. She had every reason to hide in the crowd, every reason to shrink back, but she had one reason to go forward when it didn't make sense, and that one reason was him, the God of the universe in flesh standing before her. Because if all those stories are true, then that faith would cause her to act in hope, and he would bring his power into her life, and she would encounter God. And so despite the risk, she reaches out and she touches Jesus. She's healed instantly. And then something profound happens. After Jesus notices this power going out, he stops and brings her forward. Not only does he heal her, but he restores her. He restores her publicly to the community she was exiled from. He restores her dignity, her beauty, her importance in a society that had outcast her because of how dirty she was. And I love this about Jesus. We may approach Jesus hoping for something. And sometimes we may not get what we hoped for, but we will always get more. You see, it wasn't enough for Jesus simply to heal her physically. He wanted to restore her identity, to restore her entirely. And I'll close with this thought. She approaches Jesus, she encounters him. She makes this act of hope that gives his power permission to flood into her life according to his will, his design, and his wisdom. And then Jesus tells her, "Daughter, your faith has saved you." Her faith was rewarded, don't mistake that. It's not her strength that was rewarded, it's her utter and complete weakness, hoping in his utter and complete power. Her faith is expressed as this act of hope, and it gives power permission to come into her life according to his good purpose. But I wonder if we could ask that woman, what had a greater impact on her existence? The healing of this wound, or to hear the God of the universe call her daughter? She was outcast, she was disowned, she was left in isolation. And he saw her, and he healed her, and above all, he claimed her. And yes, those two things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, to be healed or to be called son or daughter. And I'm not bringing it up to make an excuse for a lesser hope that would fail to ask God for great things. I'm bringing it up for this reality. I'm trying to make room and acknowledging that sometimes God in his infinite wisdom allows that which he could stop in his infinite power. Because I know in our lives right now, mine included, there are a lot of moments that seem like disappointed hope. Moments where we're still crossing that gap, waiting to get to the other side of God's promise. And we struggle and we doubt and we have this great disbelief and we wonder, have we been abandoned? Have we been left here? But God, in his infinite wisdom, allows that which he could stop in his infinite power. Why? Because God is always working to the good of his sons and daughters. Consider how this woman came to meet Jesus. It was her wound that she battled for 12 years. It was every failed attempt at trying to save herself. And it was her desperation that she had nowhere else to turn but this guy that could be the Messiah. And God used this moment in his great wisdom to lead her to encounter his great power. And not simply walk away healed, but walk away new, redeemed and identified as daughter, invited into eternity, not just into a better life. What would it look like tonight if we let God show us how desperate we are for him? What would it look like tonight if we allowed God to strip away all of the times that we act Catholic, but deep down have wounds and pain and doubt and fear that he's not who he says he is? What would it look like if we took every failed attempt at trying to save ourselves from whatever situation we're haunted by and laid it before him? What would it look like if we didn't hide in the crowd, but rather went elbow to elbow with this invitation to shift the history of our existence by climbing into the arms of the God that can carry us across this act of hope? What would it look like if we didn't believe in him based upon our understanding, but based upon who he is, and surrendered however difficult this moment may be to him? What power would flow from that reach? What healing would be poured into our hearts? And what sons and daughters would be claimed for eternity by a father? Hope is risky, but it's the very thing that proves our faith is alive. And for me, I struggle with both of those. Lord, help my unbelief. God, help my lack of hope. Let's pray that tonight we would do the same. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. God, you have called us to something. God, you have made promises. You have poured out promise after promise in the act of creation, creating us. Page after page of scripture bears your promises towards us, your goodness on display for us. And God, you've proven your faithfulness upon the cross, that you are who you say you are, and you will do what you say you will do. And you have given us even a greater fruit than Abraham had, to believe confidently in the faith and promises you've given us, to reach out in an act of hope, to allow you into the dark, painful parts of our life. Despite the crowd, despite the sickness, despite how many times we failed at healing ourselves, you have invited us to embrace a faith that would move us to an act of hope. Because you desire to give your power, your love, and your grace to your sons and daughters. Mother Mary, pray that we would say yes to the invitation to reach out to your son tonight. Despite calculating the cost, despite all of the risk of why we believe we should not trust that moment, that place, that situation to him, pray that we would step in an act of hope based on the faith that he is who he says he is, so we can encounter the incarnate love of God poured out before us. As we all pray, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you.